Welcome.
Yeah,
I'm
good
live
to see you
here
again.
with Mitchell Gomez. You are, I'll start with the list of things that I know about you. Executive Director of Dancesafe.
Yeah.
Co-founder of Theme Camp and creator of co-creator of a mutant vehicle.
Yeah, so I have not co-founded a theme camp. I've been involved in some big theme camps. I like building things in the desert. But yes, the mutant vehicle, I would really even call myself more of a designer and funder than anything. I'm not doing a lot of the work. The lovely folks here in Colorado who are helping out. Hex is the camp. Gamma Space is another. They do sort of festival fabrication. And yeah, they're actually doing a lot of the building.
Well, I love that. However you phrase that, of designer and originator of creative momentum. You create really cool designs and art pieces. And before we get too far into this, because I can't stop thinking about it, would you show us the shoes you just made?
Yeah. So the Denver Shoe School is literally a shoe school. You can go and make shoes. And the only manufactured piece are the soles of the shoes. Everything else is just piles of leather. And so these are the Burning Man high top kicks that I made at the Denver Shoe School. This was an old purse, and this was a leather trench coat that I sliced up.
Oh my God, man! When people say, "How do I dress like a burner?" I try to encourage people to make stuff, and at the end of that road of self-expression are shoes like that. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I've been going to the burn since 2008. This is my first pair of custom handmade Burning Man shoes. So I feel like that's a good timeline. I helped build a mutant vehicle before I built a shoe. So
they're parallel. They're both ways that you get around the burn.
Yeah, I mean, those were 16-hour high tops, like no joke. It was 16 straight hours of like sewing and fabricating and designing and taking apart because it didn't work right, and all the things that happen when you make things.
Yes, yes. Which is so. We spoke, I think it's 2019. Is that when we spoke last about harm reduction? Okay, and which is one of my favorite interviews or conversations that I've ever had on Facebook Live. So I know we're both super busy, but you have your mind and pulse on so many important things that burners need to know. I wanted to see if you could give us a download on maybe the current state of harm reduction and maybe things that are new to burners since we talked in 2019.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to show before we start this, so this is the symbol for our mutant vehicle. So if you see it, it's going to be a large metal pirate ship. I don't know if the flags are going to get here in time, but we will have stuff with the Dancesafe logo and this guy on there. So it's the Junk of the Damned is the name of the pirate ship. So if you see this guy floating by, if you see a sheet metal pirate ship floating by, this is the logo to keep an eye out for.
And who designed the logo?
What was that?
Who designed the logo?
Dima is the artist name. So Dimitri, I don't know if you know Dimitri. He does a really cool. Have you ever gotten gifted one of those stretchy Burning Man dust masks that always has like really complex patterned logo? So those are his gifts every year. Yeah, I think his. Let me look up his like art page name so I can properly. Art by Dima Yastronaut. Yastronaut Space Station is his like art name. And so yeah, Dima's an incredible designer. Does these really cool 3D show posters, heavily supports Dancesafe. He's done some fundraiser pins for us in the past. And so yeah, he very kindly designed that logo for us for free, which was not a small ask for an artist of his caliber. So and then I designed this one, as long as we're showing off designs. This is my opinion for the year. So if you come to any of my talks on Playa, I will have some of these in my pocket. And yeah, I'll swing by Pink Heart and drop some off for you guys as well.
That is Flavor Flav level awesomeness right there.
Yeah, it's a big one. I decided to go big this year.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so festivals have been starting back up, right? So like not that I'm calling Burning Man a festival, but I have gotten to see a few things since the dark COVID times. Did not do Renegade Man, so it's actually going to be since 2019 since I've been on Playa, which is the longest I've gone without going to that desert since 2008. This is the longest break I've taken from being out there. And yeah, one of the things that we're really noticing is that people are kind of overdoing it. People are heading back into events, and I feel like maybe either trying to make up for lost time, or maybe not taking into account the fact that maybe they haven't touched some of these things that they're going to be doing for a year or two, right? So if you're used to doing, like let's say ketamine every few months, and then you go a very long time without doing ketamine, like your tolerance levels have reset, right? Same for MDMA or for, Adderall or other stimulants that you might be into, and not taking into account that tolerances have changed. Or just like trying to make up for lost time, right? Like I haven't seen this act in so many years, and like I really want to go hard, or I haven't been on playa in 3 years, and so I'm going to go really hard. And as you know, like going hard on playa can be a bad move. Like it's a physically hard environment. Sober, like it's a physically hard environment sober, and altered, it can be like a really life altering environment if you're not careful, particularly on hot years, and it's going to be a hot year. And so, yeah, I fully anticipate that COVID and monkeypox aside, medical is going to be busy this year. None of us are sure if this is the end of COVID or a little interlude might play into it, right? Like it's not like this might necessarily be Burning Man being back. This might be Burning Man 2022, and like other things are going to happen by 2023, right? Like we don't have any guarantees out here. I'm still shocked the BLM didn't issue a blanket closure order last year. I was sure they were just going to close the playa, say nobody can be out here this week or two. Very surprised that didn't happen. I think if we ever had a year where Burning Man doesn't happen again, they're going to do that. I think that the rural infrastructure was so close to being overwhelmed last year that realistically they would not let it happen again without some sort of infrastructure, permits, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, no, I agree. I think that there's a lot of different factors at play, but yeah, just reminding people that like, it's worth taking Tim Leary had an old joke, right? You can always take more later. You can never take less later, right? So like starting low, going slow, knowing what you're putting in your body, doing all of that homework before you get to playa and lose signal. If you're going to try new combinations, it's always worth like doing research on those combinations. And you can't really do that research once you're out there, unless you have Starlink. I don't know if you saw the Starlink map, but Elon lined up a bunch of satellites for Burn Week, which,
really?
Yeah. So there's like literally a row of satellites that are going to be over the playa during Burn Week. I really hope he put them in the shape of the man. Like that would be the funniest thing Andy Burner's ever done. Elon, if you're watching, please do it, and also return my emails. And so,
the reminding people that yes, we are being released into the burn again. There's a temptation to go really hard, but also remembering that the experience of Burning Man is not just taking experiences and having your mind blown, but also being there and supporting others and not being a burden, and not, radical self-reliance and that radical self-expression are all within, communal effort, and making sure that you are not a reason why the event sucks for someone else or why the event is put in jeopardy. And you're not gonna be able to gift what you have to gift if you are gone.
Yeah. And, and criminal charges too, right? Like that is another sort of like thing that can really impact your ability to provide for the community, is if you're, defending yourself against criminal charges. And so I think there's a lot of reasons to believe in some level of moderation and safety on playa. And yeah, in terms of drug markets, like we have seen a lot of sort of fluctuating things. I guess to address the 800-pound gorilla right off the bat, like it does still seem like we're seeing an increase in fentanyl in non-opioid drugs. It's obviously impossible to gather any sort of meaningful data on this. I have people ask me all the time, like, how often does cocaine have fentanyl in it? It's like, well, to answer that, I would need to know how much cocaine there is in the United States, right? And so I have like no way to know the numerator of that equation. And so I don't know how to answer if it's becoming more prevalent, what percentage of these drugs have fentanyl in them. That data can't exist under prohibition. It's really unfortunate. But from purely anecdotal sources, looking at deaths attributed to synthetic opioids, drug deaths overall, it's really, really clear that this is a real problem. It's a problem that seems to be accelerating still. I was really hoping that COVID might put a little bit of a damper on the dynamic. I Don't know why. Maybe I was trying to look for silver linings. It's a thing I do. But yeah, just knowing that just because you or your crew don't use opiates, which also, by the way, you don't actually know, because people who would do drugs with complete strangers won't tell their best friend that they're using opiates. Like, you almost certainly know opiate users, but you don't know that they're opiate users. But even if you're sure that your crew doesn't do opiates, figuring out local resources for Narcan so that you can bring your own Narcan with you and have it in camp. Almost every area in this country, if you call a local needle exchange, a local harm reduction place, even a Walgreens in a lot of states, you can pick up Narcan, and it's very easy to use, very easy to get trained. And realistically, it's one of those things that, like, probably every police officer, Black Rock Ranger, DPW person should carry on them. It's not how things are structured within Nevada. Like, it would be difficult for the org to make that a policy. And so I understand why they don't. And I'm not actually criticizing the org for that. They have a very difficult line to walk when you're dealing with federal agencies issuing your permit that means the existence of Burning Man or not. And so I don't begrudge the org their willingness to follow the mandates of the feds. I understand why they do that. But as individuals, we can make those choices, right? As individuals, we can all carry Narcan. As individuals, we can all get fentanyl testing strips and make sure that anything that's coming into our bodies has been tested with either reagents, fentanyl testing strips. There are some places that now have drop-in drug checking clinics. So like Chicago has a legal location where you can take your drugs and they will chemically analyze them on FTIR. San Francisco has been working on it. I'm not actually sure where that is in San Francisco, but I feel like it might be up and running. Same with Seattle. And so making sure that if you put anything in your body, you've personally tested it for fentanyl, because we have seen fentanyl in samples. In cocaine, it's quite common. In amphetamines, it seems pretty common, methamphetamine in particular. It seems like fentanyl showing up in meth is a relatively common thing. But we've also seen it confirmed in samples that were sold as MDMA, samples that were sold as ketamine. There was a case of DMT that was adulterated with fentanyl that we know happened because there was a sort of large criminal trial that took place around that incident. Somebody ordered DMT for their friend on the dark web. It arrived at her house. She smoked it and passed away from fentanyl exposure, and they charged the guy who ordered it with drug-induced homicide. Yeah. And made it stick. They got a conviction. They got a drug-induced homicide conviction because he ordered DMT on the dark web for a friend. And we've also seen carfentanil laid on blotter paper that we believe was being sold as carfentanil. Carfentanil is more expensive than LSD. There's no reason that anybody would put carfentanil on blotter and call it acid. But unfortunately, they were just using blotter paper they got on eBay. And so it was like Albert Hoffman bicycle day blotter paper with carfentanil laid on it. And so the concern, of course, is if somebody dropped a 10 strip of that, nobody who sees a 10 strip of Albert Hoffman bicycle day blotter is going to think opiates, right? Like, that's just like the furthest possible thing from your mind. And so the concern there is not intentional misrepresentation, but just like mix-ups. And so, yeah, it really is like worth learning how to respond to these things.
So question, so I'll admit, I picked up Narcan a while ago. One, is it good for a while? And two, I never trained myself or got trained. So what would be the path to making sure that I know what to do when I need it?
So in most states, you're supposed to do training before you can pick it up. There are YouTube trainings. So if you just go on YouTube and like how to use Narcan, like I'm not a licensed Narcan trainer. It's on the long list of some days, but it hasn't happened yet. And so there are some good YouTube videos out there. The nasal spray is quite easy to use, but just watch a YouTube video so that you get all the information. One of the really important things to know is that the timelines between synthetic opioids and Narcan often don't overlap particularly well. And so what I mean by that is it's possible that somebody takes a synthetic opioid, you give them Narcan, they sit up, they seem to be okay, they walk away from the situation, and then the Narcan wears off before the opiates do, and they collapse again. And if there's not somebody there with another dose, they could pass away from that. And so if somebody is unresponsive and you give them Narcan and they wake up, that's not the end of the process. You need to get them to medical and explain to medical what happened, so that if they re-enter into that not breathing opiated state, they have medical care there to take care of them. Because that does happen, where people get Narcan, they're okay, they like walk away from the scene, and then they collapse again without taking any additional drugs.
Damn.
So that sucks, because like you would assume that, okay, the person's awake and talking, like I can walk away from this situation. That is not the end of the situation anymore, unfortunately. With heroin, that's sort of the end of the situation with heroin, but we're not really dealing with heroin anymore. There's not really a ton of heroin in the US right now. And so, yeah, it's so hard to walk that line of adequately expressing the dangers without coming off as reactionary, without coming off as like trying to scare people, because we're not an anti-drug organization by any means. I actually very openly speak about the fact that psychedelics in particular and MDMA have provided great value to my life. I actually think that they have been a tremendous benefit in my life personally, and I think they bring a lot to society. But prohibition itself has created these dangers, and the dangers are real, right? Fentanyl in cocaine is not a cocaine problem, it's a cocaine prohibition problem. And so being really upfront about the fact that like, I'm not trying to scare people, but there is no amount of money that would convince me to take a bump of cocaine from a stranger at this point. Like, it is not something I would do, period, because of how common fentanyl in cocaine is. And so it's just the dynamic of the situation has changed. I understand the gifting culture of the burn very well. I understand that sometimes that gifting culture extends to things that are not necessarily legal under state or federal law. Taking candy from strangers is a legitimately more dangerous thing now than it was a few years ago. The dynamic around that has changed.
And it's even, I mean, the legal law enforcement risks of taking candy from a stranger is pretty legit too. I definitely know people that have been partying with undercover people, and then when the night went to offering or being offered drugs, and that was the end of their burn and the ruining of the rest of their year.
Sure, or a couple of years. I mean, I have a friend who served 3 in a Nevada prison because of a Burning Man incident. Usually that's more on they're trying to get you to share with them. I haven't heard a ton of stories of the other direction. Good point.
You're right.
But the dangers exist all over the place now. Yeah, here, I'll show you what we really need, what I'd love to get back to. This is a real label for a children's cough drop. It's a cocaine label, like this is like a legal over-the-counter cocaine product in this country. I have the label on my wall. I like to keep constant reminders around me that prohibition is the historical aberration, not the historical norm. For most of our society, drug prohibition was not a thing. For most of human history, the idea that drugs could be banned would have been seen as ludicrous. Like, that's not a thing that most societies would have accepted. And so, yeah, I like to keep those reminders around me, including like pre-Columbian mushroom stones and like things that way predate, our existing country are important reminders to me of what we're fighting here.
So I want to ask you about your artifacts in a second, but while I'm thinking about it and the prohibition things, do you have thoughts on the How to Change Your Mind Netflix series and what that means for us to have that kind of part of more popular culture?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of dangerous moments approaching where we need to be very careful how we pass through them. If we try to end prohibition by simply ending the drugs that rich white kids like, primarily for rich white kids to use them, right? Which is what MDMA medicalization substantially is going to mean at first. It's going to be quite expensive. It's going to be limited to those with insurance or those that MAPS is able to, on the back end, financially support them going through MDMA therapy. If we're just talking about, people always want to talk about legalizing plant medicines, but they never want to include cocaine or morphine, both of which are naturally occurring alkaloids that occur within the coca and poppy plant, respectively, right? Cocaine is not a semi-synthetic drug. It is a naturally occurring alkaloid in the coca plant. And so I have a lot of concerns about people simply leveraging their privilege to legalize the drugs they like. I am a general anti-prohibitionist. I think that we should not be going drug by drug. I don't think we should say, oh, let's legalize MDMA and mushrooms and LSD, and like we'll leave all the others to be illegal, for a lot of different reasons. But the big one is that all drug users deserve to be as safe as they can be, and that can't happen under prohibition. It is impossible to provide true harm reduction under prohibition because what we need is regulated supply, right? The only way to end adulteration is to have supply be under the control of some sort of regulatory body, not under the control of criminal organizations. And so until we do that, harm reduction is always going to be mitigation. It's never going to be proactive. I cannot be proactive about what new drugs that we need to figure out how to test for, because I have to wait for the market to develop those drugs, decide to introduce them into the drug markets, and then I have to responsibly develop testing technology to look for those new drugs. And there's so many possibilities, right? I mean, we're talking about like, before Sasha Shulgin passed away, I'm assuming most of your listeners know who that is, but he's often called the godfather of MDMA. He's the one who repopularized MDMA in the 70s, also invented all of the 2C series. He invented hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drugs. And at Burning Man 2008, I asked him, you know, at the current rate that the government is banning new drugs, how long until we run out of drugs, right? Like, how long is this gonna, and his sort of back of envelope projection was 2,500 years. Right. So like being responsive is not a solution here. It's not a tenable way out of the problem. You know, the synthetic opioid thing, anybody could have seen coming. When Trump announced his candidacy, I wrote a pretty long piece about how if Trump won and he was able to get the money to build his border wall, we would see a massive increase in synthetic opioid deaths. Because as it gets harder to smuggle heroin, drug sellers would switch to more potent opioid analogs. And it is the saddest I've ever been to be right? Like, I've never been so upset that I was right about something, but this was an eminently predictable dynamic that if you increase border enforcement, people switch to more doses per smuggled shoebox. And so that means more potent drugs, right? That's what that dynamic is always going to do. For the same reason that during alcohol prohibition in this country, it was almost impossible to get beer. Everybody was smuggling whiskey and gin because you wanted the most doses per smuggled gallon. And so as soon as alcohol prohibition ended, everybody switched back to wine and beer. And you can actually see in charts the sort of drop off of liver disease that happened after we ended alcohol prohibition.
Whoa.
Because people were just pounding whiskey and gin under alcohol prohibition. And then once it ended, they could go buy beer and wine. And so their drinking tended to like modulate down based on, you know, alcohol content. Right. So we're seeing the parallel. Like, that's the exact parallel we're seeing right now, is this like, and so I do think that it's really amazing that we're seeing cracks in the dam of drug prohibition. I think incrementalist steps are fine. It's taken me a long time to get there, but the thing that finally got me there is Rick Doblin from MAPS. The framing he gave me that let me sleep with it at night is that it's fine to be a revolutionary, but the job of the revolutionary is primarily to keep the incrementalists honest. Like, the incrementalists do more work than us. Like, I want to burn drug prohibition to the ground, but you know, in Denver now, like, you know, psilocybin is basically like, they can still arrest you for it, but they can't use any resources to arrest or prosecute you. So like, if you walk up to a cop and you shake a bag of mushrooms in his face, like, yeah, they can still put you in handcuffs, but it's like basically a non-crime in Denver now. And like, that's amazing. Like, I'm not going to argue with the fact that that's amazing. But we still have tons of people who are taking fentanyl when they're trying to get heroin. And those people should not be left out in the cold just because their drugs are perceived as, you know, more dangerous or less desirable. And like, I don't like opiates. Like, I've lost a lot of good friends to opiates. I'm not suggesting people go out and do heroin, but what I am saying is that we have to treat heroin users as deserving of life. And drug policy is primarily what's killing them now. And so we as a society have chosen this. And total drug deaths as of last year are now twice the peak year of HIV deaths. Right? We're talking about a massive public health crisis that is being substantially ignored in the same way that early HIV deaths were ignored, right? It's the right people dying in the eyes of those with structural political power. And so they're not really that interested in ending these deaths because they don't actually care. You know, in the early years, they didn't care that young gay men were dying. They just didn't. And in the same way now, there's a lot of people within political power that their response to this crisis is, if you don't want to die from drugs, don't do any drugs, right? If you don't want to be exposed to fentanyl and cocaine, don't ever do cocaine, right? If you don't want to be exposed to fentanyl and ketamine, just don't do ketamine. And to me, it's such a parallel to the whole, like, well, we should just stop giving kids condoms because then they won't have sex, right? Like, it's literally that argument, often being made by the same people. Like, it's not just the same argument, it's the same people making that argument. And so, yeah, I love when I turn on the TV and I get to like see people that I know really well and I'm friends with, right? Like Carl Hart's on our advisory council, and like Michael Pollan's a homie, and like I love seeing them on TV talking about drugs. Like, I did not think I would get to see that level of publicity around entheogenic awakening. Like, I never thought I would see that. What I'm really aching for is a broader public discourse around how prohibition itself is killing Americans. Right. So we can't be talking about just legalizing psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, DMT. Of course, those things should be legal. Of course, they are intrinsically less physiologically dangerous than heroin. Like, I'm not saying that DMT and heroin are equally safe. That would be medically untrue. But most of the dangers of these substances, even the ones that people think of as really dangerous, are either created by prohibition or exacerbated by prohibition. And so that's really what I'm dying for, is that conversation at the national level. And I adorably optimistically thought that maybe having a president with a son who had really publicly struggled with his issues around his relationship with drugs might mean that we'd get to have that conversation. Hunter Biden has written publicly about how he stopped using stimulants using 5-MeO-DMT, like he went through a toad ceremony. Like, he's written about this. It's public record. I'm not outing anybody with this. This is public information he released. But it's illegal in the United States, right? So he had to go to Mexico for this treatment. So like, when the president's son had successful treatment around really problematic use of drugs, using a treatment that is illegal in the United States, how are we not going to at least have the conversation about legalizing that treatment, right? Like, how are we just going to ignore the fact that this is available for those with resources, right? Anybody with money can go to Mexico or Canada and there are 5-MeO-DMT billboards in the Yucatan now. Like, you're driving down the road in the Yucatan and there's like billboards that are like DMT here. It's not DMT. They should not call it that, but that's what they say, right? It's a different drug. It's 5-methoxy-DMT. But there are, if you have money to go to the Yucatan, if you have money to go to Canada, you can absolutely get this treatment. And yet this treatment that has shown tremendous efficacy in treating stimulant disorder, like people who have an unhealthy relationship with stimulants, is illegal for those without money and legal for those with it. And so I really have some concerns about how we're approaching the end of prohibition. And the other reason is I don't want to leave the weirdos out. Like, there are plenty of non-problematic drugs, or relatively non-problematic drugs, things like 2CB, 2CI, like, that we're never going to build a national coalition around legalizing 2CB. And so, like, I don't want to leave the people who like that one out of the conversation simply because there aren't enough of them to change the laws around the drugs they like. Right. And like, most people who try 2CB find it to be a really wonderful experience if it was measured out correctly. Dose is like super important for all drugs, but the 2C family, it's like the whole thing. And so there's this drug out there that like people take, they really enjoy it. It was legal for a long time in this country, and there were no known deaths when it was legally available. You couldn't sell it as a drug, but it was sold as like pond cleaning chemicals online. And we're never going to build a coalition around that. And so there's a lot of really good reasons to not do this, this drug and then this drug and then this drug and then this drug, but to actually attack politically the fundamental idea that the government should be regulating what we put in our bodies in that way. And I'm really quite uncomfortable with that. I'm quite uncomfortable with the idea that growing a plant in my garden to consume in my living room could somehow be a federal crime under interstate commerce laws, right? That's how they create federal drug laws, is saying, oh, you could have sold it over state lines. So interstate commerce is what allows us the authority to arrest you for a federal crime. When it's like, that does not really flow for me as somebody who, we have a Supreme Court that claims to love originalism. And yet we're not having a conversation about the fact that I don't see any textual basis for federal drug crimes in the Constitution. I do not see any delegated authority within the Constitution for a federal drug law at all, like, period. And so the fact that they've created these post hoc justifications for federal law that they wanted to pass for other reasons that were very tied with race, right? It wasn't about the drugs, it was about who was doing those drugs openly. That's not conspiracy. That's what they were saying publicly, right? Is that we want to be able to, these jazz musicians, which was just code for Black people, are influencing white women, was literally the justification for banning cocaine, right? I mean, that was the whole thing, is that Black men were doing it around white women. And that was the whole public justification. Newspapers, right? Like the drug that makes white women crave Negroes was like, these are newspaper ads from the 30s and 40s, like not paranoia. And then they needed to create a justification after that was no longer politically tenable to continue saying that for the reason. And they sort of went backwards and rewrote history, you know, saying, oh, like there's all this evidence that cocaine is really dangerous. And it's like, yeah, there's cardiac issues and like, you know, obviously there's behavioral issues. But like, if you banned coffee tomorrow and made it $10,000 a pound, there would be armed robberies over coffee.
Right.
Like there would be. Like I might be one of them. It's the only drug I'm physiologically dependent on. I get terrible migraines when I don't drink. I have it. I mean, look, literally at my desk, right? I don't ever not right. And so yeah, I have a lot of concerns around this, around the movement, around where we're going. This is actually, I'm only doing 2 talks at Burning Man this year, and they're both on this subject, because that's how on this subject I am, around like the need to not have such narrow glasses on when we're discussing how the laws need to change. That we really need to be going very, very broad, building a national coalition around the idea of bodily autonomy. Right? It's the idea that we ourselves get to control what enters our bodies. And this is one of those areas where I often fight with other people within the movement. I actually do think that vaccine mandates would have been unconstitutional and would have been inappropriate if the government had said, you are mandated to get these vaccines. I got vaccinated at the minute I was available. I am pro-science, pro-vaccine. I just don't think the government should be mandating what we put in our bodies. And that includes that. It includes reproductive health. It includes cybernetic upgrades when that technology becomes available. Like we need to establish this as a right before that technology becomes available, or only the military is going to get to upgrade their brain. And that's a scary world, right? Like I'm not down with living on that planet. Like we need to make sure those upgrade technologies are available to everybody who wants them. And so, yeah, I think that building that coalition around bodily autonomy is the way to end the drug war. And so, yeah, those are the only 2 talks I'm doing.
Well, this is why I love talking to you. So can you tell us where and when the talks are?
Yeah, so I pulled that up before this talk, so I'd have it right here. Cool. So Tuesday night, 6:30 to 7:30, I will be doing a talk at Camp Soft Landing, which is 945 in E. So the speaker series there is called Palenque Norte, which is actually a direct outgrowth of the Palenque speaker series that Timothy Leary was involved in the 1970s. So Palenque Norte is the same organizers as the original Palenque speaker series. It's been happening at Burning Man for many years. Incredible speakers. Make sure to swing by and check out their speaker list. It's unbelievable. So that's Tuesday, 6:30 to 7:30 at 945 in E. And then my other talk is Thursday, and that's going to be 5 p.m. at the Entheogeneration speaker series at the camp that everybody calls Bronner's, even though we beg them not to. So 2:30 in F. This year, the camp name is Bubble Entendre. It's always got a clever bubble or foam related name. So it changes name every year. So it's, you know, something wicked this way foams was a couple years ago. Always a great name. Yeah. So this year it's Bubble Entendre. But yeah, that's 5 p.m. at Thursday. And that's actually the start of the speaker series. I'm the opening speaker for that speaker series, followed very shortly at that same night by Rick Doblin, Carl Hart. And I feel like Michael Pollan might be on the speaker list. I've not seen the full speaker list yet, but this is seeing Rick Doblin speak at the burn, if you've never done it, is one of those moments that like, you got to do it. Like Rick is the most engaging, compelling voice for MDMA legalization that this country has ever had. We are now less than 2 years away from FDA approval for MDMA for a PTSD treatment because of Rick. Like there have been a lot of funders, a lot of supporters, a lot of donors, a lot of other people doing the work, but without Rick, this would not be happening. And so getting to hear him speak about what next steps mean once MDMA is a legal medicine is worth doing at Burning Man. So yeah, that'll be 5 p.m. at 2:30 in F at the Bubble Dome.
Okay. Yeah. The Foamy Homies or
the Foamy
whatever.
Homies. Yeah, the Foamy Homies.
Yeah.
We have a lot of different names.
And
you can literally smell our camp. Like you can smell it when you're approaching. It's one of the only camps that has that. Like so much mint soap that you can like smell the camp from a block away. You're like, it's around here somewhere, I swear. Well, that and the Hell Station where you get gasoline for your art cars. That one you can smell
right,
too.
You can smell that. Not quite as inviting, but
yeah,
yes.
Not depending on what you're into, but yeah, not as inviting for me.
So briefly, I'm wondering if you could share your fascination with artifacts. You mentioned something about it's related to ancient mushrooms. Something is
yeah. I mean, I have a lot of here. I'll grab a couple things that way I can show them to you.
Okay.
Let's grab this guy. Grab this guy. And then there's a big one that I'm going to have to use both hands. So yeah, so my I don't know if you can still hear me. I'm speaking while I do this, but
yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, my undergraduate degree was actually in anthropology, and I've always been fascinated by pre-Columbian psychedelic religion. So this is a Mayan mushroom stone. If you've seen Paul Stamets ever do interviews, he has a much larger collection than I do. So yeah, actually most of mine are currently on loan to COSM. So if you swing by the new COSM museum, a bunch of my mushroom stones are on loan up there. So yeah, that's like a 3,500-ish years old. This little mushroom-headed man is about 4,000 years old.
Amazing.
Here we have a guy holding a big old mushroom.
Wow.
Yeah, also about 4,000 years old. And then interestingly, so this is Aztec. So this is only like 500 or 600 years old. So from 4,000 years ago, all the way up till about 500 years ago, they were making these like really substantially similar symbology around mushrooms. Like they were a very important part of the Nahua religion. There's a statue in Mexico City in the National Anthropology Museum of a god Xochipilli, which literally means the Prince of Flowers. And he's covered in tattoo marks. The statue is of the god, and he's covered in these marks. And all of the marks show different psychoactive plants, right? So there's like cinchuili, which has LSA in it. There's like mushroom caps. There's tobacco. And then there's this flower that does not correspond with any plant that we know of, right? On his right arm, there's this little flower. There's a little bit of plaster left. You can see it was probably painted white. So I think it's a white flower of a plant that we don't know about, which keeps me up some nights, like just thinking about quitting my job in harm reduction and going out into the Oaxaca highlands with an FTIR and my drug testing equipment and just picking every little white flower I see and putting it on this expensive analytical equipment and seeing what happens is like sort of a recurring dream of mine to just go do this, because somewhere out there that plant still exists. I'm sure of it. It's something new, it's something unknown, but they knew about it, right? Unknown to us. And so yeah, this was a god within the Nahua religion, right? The Prince of Flowers was one of their sort of deities. This was such an integrated part of their religious beliefs and expressions. That yeah, and I have, on my father's side, I have some Nahua ancestry, and so yeah, an abiding and fascinating subject for me, but also works as my constant reminder that drug prohibition is a historical aberration. We're in this, like, it feels like it's been the norm forever because humans are really bad at time, right? Like we're just terrible at understanding time. And so because it's existed our whole lives, it feels eternal, but it's really quite new. right? Like the idea of drug prohibition is newer than the automobile, right? Like it's like we had cars before we had prohibition. And so, you know, it's not this thing that we've always done and society would collapse if we ended it. You know, I hear this all the time, like, oh, everybody would be doing heroin. I'm like, I think most people who want to do heroin are doing heroin right now. Like, I think most people who want to do cocaine are doing cocaine right now. I think there are some people who don't do these things because they're illegal. I do think we'd see a small increase, particularly cocaine. I feel like cocaine would have a small increase in use. If we have a 3% increase in use and a 95% decrease in deaths, because we're now controlling supply and there's no more fentanyl showing up where it shouldn't, and people know how strong their heroin is. And when you buy MDMA, it comes in a little thing with a little, you know, flap with the instructions about avoiding high temperatures, and here's how much water to drink, and here's an oxygen monitor if you're going to be doing ketamine. And, you know, we could integrate harm reduction into the distribution model under not decriminalization, legalization. I'm explicitly talking about legalized supply. We could create a world where drug use, even of those drugs that are more intrinsically dangerous, is really quite safe. And Switzerland has proven this, right? So Switzerland has a heroin maintenance program. So people who are physiologically dependent on heroin can go to their doctor. They can say, hey, like, I'm physiologically dependent on heroin, and they will give them free heroin. It is medically produced heroin. I think it's Bayer that makes it. I think Bayer has the patents, but it's medically produced legal heroin. They do have to give up their driver's license, which in a country with good public transit is a sort of lower bar than it would be in the United States. The goal is not to like, oh, we'll give them heroin now, but we're going to force them into treatment or we're going to wean them off. Or no, it's here's enough heroin that you don't have to go score. And then when those people decide they want to quit, and most of them do, most of the people in this program eventually voluntarily say, I want to stop using drugs, they can enter treatment without any of the stigma, without any of the risk of like accidental relapse. If they decide they want to start using again, they tell their doctor and they give it back to them. And in I want to say it's been 23 years now, nobody has ever died in the Swiss program. 0 deaths. Because when you know how strong your heroin is, when you're using it under medical supervision, when you're not having to go out and hustle all day to be able to score, you can live a relatively normal life, even when you're using heroin every day. Most of them are employed. Most of them have families. They have their lives together. They just need their heroin every day, the same way that I need my coffee every day. And when you treat it like that, when you treat it as a thing that is just like, okay, this is a thing you physiologically need, but we're not going to shame you. We're not going to make you go out and hustle for it. We're not going to make you buy it on unregulated markets where it's much more dangerous. Like, yeah, it's still heroin, but like 23 years with 0 deaths is a hell of a data point. I mean, that's really like a very impressive data point. And even President Sampaio, the president in Portugal who decriminalized all drugs, has publicly said that the biggest mistake they made in Portugal is that they didn't legalize sales. They should have created a regulated model for sales so that criminal organizations would not control the markets. And he said that was their biggest mistake they made. It wasn't that they went too far, it's that they didn't go far enough. You know, that was the mistake of Portugal, according to the president who passed the legalization of drugs there in 2000. And so, yeah, these are policy deaths. And so we can end them. And, you know, it's particularly appropriate heading into a place like Nevada, where this is the last thing I'll talk about directly related to Burning Man, unless you want to, you know, we can keep going. But so Nevada, for the BLM, there is no federal paraphernalia statute that applies to test kits, but for the BLM permit for Burning Man, they take the Nevada state statute and they copy it. And so by the letter of the law in Nevada, test kits are drug paraphernalia. This is true in, I believe, 36 states. In 36 states, test kits are considered drug paraphernalia. Dancesafe ships test kits to all 50 states. I would walk up to a cop in any state and hand them a test kit and a copy of the law and dare them to arrest me. As far as we've been able to tell, nobody has ever been arrested under these paraphernalia laws. But just the fact that the letter of the law is written such that fentanyl test strips could be considered illegal, I think really sums up the sort of deep failures of our drug policy, right? It would be like banning condoms. Like that would be the equivalent, right? We are going to outlaw condoms to reduce premarital sex, right? That's the argument, is if we make drug use dangerous enough, people won't do it. And so it's an explicitly harm maximization policy. That is what prohibition is designed to do. the head of the DEA under one of the Bushes, I can't remember if it was Bush 1 or 2, said in open congressional testimony that the goal of the DEA was to make drug use so dangerous only a crazy person would do it. But that he said that was the goal of the DEA, not to make Americans safer, not to reduce drug deaths, not to help drug users who want to stop using drugs stop. He said the goal was to make drug use so dangerous that only a crazy person would do it. And like, that's really revealing that he was willing to say that publicly. Not that he believed it. I believe that he believed it. The fact that he was willing to say it is what's so shocking to me. Because it really does fly in the face of a lot of the values that our country claims to hold really sacrosanct, right? The idea that the government should not be harming our citizenry is a really, really, really precious belief within American body politic on the left and the right, right? The government should not be actively harming American citizens. And yet we have this one glaring example where they say it. Like, they just say it. Like, they say our goal is to hurt as many people as possible. Our goal is for so many people to die that nobody will do these things. And I just find that so horrifying that we have laws written that are designed to harm American citizens under the guise of helping them.
Well, I am so grateful that you are using your voice and your energy fighting in the way you do. If you,
for the record, the energy comes from the fight. like if I was out there selling real estate, I would not be this enthusiastic about it. Like, it's not like I'm taking my existing energy and channeling it. No, I come from a family where social justice was really important. My great-grandfather and grandfather were both involved in the Chicano rights movement. Whites only barbers included Hispanics in Colorado. You were not white if you were Hispanic, and so you couldn't sit at a whites only barber. And so, yeah, they were involved in the fight to end that sort of segregation process. My parents raised me in a sort of modern conservative to modern Orthodox family, a Jewish family. And there's a principle within Jewish law that you are not only allowed, but required to break any of the commandments God gave if breaking that commandment will save a life. Right? You are literally commanded to break the commandments if you need to do so in order to save a life. And so I really do feel that there's a religious imperative within Judaism to end the drug war. Like, the drug war is killing people. I'm commanded to do anything within my power, even if it breaks the law, to save lives. And so the idea that I might someday get arrested for distributing test kits does not concern me, does not frighten me. Like, it's a thing I am very willing to do, and would actually love to have that fight in front of the Supreme Court. I think there are very compelling arguments under both personal liberty, 4th and 14th Amendment, and under the idea of religious liberty under the First Amendment for breaking the law in order to save lives because they're being endangered by drug prohibition. And we have the tools, like, we have the tools to fix this. It's political will is what we're missing.
Well,
oh wait, there's one more talk I want to plug.
Yes.
Hold on, let me find that other talk. I'm glad I remembered. So one of my absolutely amazing coworkers, Kristen, is giving a talk at Burning Man. Oh, hold on. She said, when are your talks? But she didn't send me her talk. Oh, I know how to find it. Hold on, we can do it. I can do it. I love how pink even your house is, by the way.
Thank you. I finally am an owner and I have a mortgage. So the first thing I did was paint my walls pink.
I find that unsurprising. All right. So Kristen and Sloan, who are two amazing coworkers of mine. Kristen's another member of the Dancesafe executive staff. And Sloan, they're giving a class called Consent, Sex, and Drugs at the Orgy Dome, and then There's Only Love is the other name of that camp. So that will be on Friday from 12:30 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. And yeah, they are awesome speakers. How do you navigate consent when you're intoxicated is a thing that we do not often talk about and is really important at Burning Man. And when you fuck up in that regard, it can be a very, very serious fuck up if you fuck up around somebody's consent boundaries and intoxication. And so learning like what that looks like and how to navigate that, super awesome. And so yeah, that's another talk I wanted to make sure to pitch.
if you think of it, if you want to send me the talk she mentioned, I'll include it in the notes for this on
Beautiful.
Facebook
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
YouTube
Absolutely.
when it goes on. Yeah, excellent. So if I miss you at the burn, I'm going to assume that that meant that you went in search of the white flower. But is there anything else you want to leave people with heading the Burning Man, or just on your mind?
Yeah, a little piece of advice for virgins I feel like is super important, because every year I meet people who come from the festival community into the burn scene, and they come to Burning Man thinking that it's like a really wild music festival. And the reality is, I have never been offered less drugs anywhere other than Burning Man. Like, I've been offered more drugs in default cities, like walking down the street in New York, than I have in Black Rock City. It really is a radically self-reliant community. It really is not like a music festival where people are walking around campgrounds trying to sell things. People who show up at Burning Man thinking like, oh, I'll score some Molly here, like, your odds of accidentally having a law enforcement encounter versus actually finding drugs are like way skewed at Burning Man. And also, like, realistically, you should test your drugs at home and figure out what you're going to be taking and do that research. And so please, 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 whether you're virgins or not, like, don't think of Burning Man as a music festival. Don't treat it like music festival. Like, it really is a different thing, and it really is worth doing all the research before you get there, because even on good years, the playa can kick your ass. And I think it's going to be a really hot, really dusty year, and really hot, really dusty years kick. Like, I mean, I know people who've gone to Burning Man for 30 years who still have rough years out there. So like, yeah, this is going to be, I believe, my 9th burn. So I get my little 10-year token at 2023. I'm excited. And like, I read the survival guide every year, because there is always at least one moment in the survival guide where I'm like, oh shit, like, I totally forgot to pack my own moleskin, or like, oh, like extra bike chains, like, fuck, I would have forgotten my extra bike chains, right? Like, and like, this is not my first rodeo, and I still always read the survival guide. I go back and watch old Halcyon videos. Like, I still do the thing, because yeah, it's, if you forget a bike chain, you can have such a shitty burn if you can't find the right size one. You know, like, it's like little things. You know, my first year, I didn't take foot care seriously. I was like, I don't need to soak my feet in vinegar. What bullshit. Like, these people are just trying. And I had a chemical playa burn in my foot that took 3 months to heal. Like, the playa just like ate a hole out of my foot, and it took a quarter of a year for it to heal. So like, yeah, I take that shit real seriously now. Like, every night I have a little alarm set. I go and sit my foot in vinegar. I like wipe it down. I put lotion on. I put clean socks on every single night. Like, yeah, it's just worth taking it seriously, because yeah, I once quipped to Larry that like, I love the playa, but wouldn't it have been interesting to do this somewhere nice? Was like, I think how I phrased it. And his answer was, Mitchell, we throw this party in hell and we still sell a lot of tickets. I was like, oh, it's such a valid point, Larry. Damn it. Like, if it was somewhere pleasant, there'd be 2 million people trying to get tickets. It would be terrible. And so, yeah, very Larry piece of advice, you know, or a piece of wisdom. He always thought about the burn in such interesting ways. And yeah, I miss him. And so, yeah, but we're going to run into each other, Halcyon. I'm going to come by your camp. Where are you located this year? Let's
we're 8 and E. 8 and E is where Pink Heart is. And since we're talking about the videos and stuff, I will say that I have a new boot camp series, bootcamp.hugnation.com. And it's like 5 videos that you can send to your newbies or listen to it on your drive or something like that.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. As soon as I'm off my Facebook ban, I will, I'll share that as well. I literally shared a meme that was found on Osama bin Laden's hard drive of the kid from Malcolm in the Middle smoking a blunt. Like, this was on Osama bin Laden's hard drive. I'm not kidding. And I shared it, and I was like, how hilarious that this was on Osama bin Laden's hard drive. And I got a 7-day ban for supporting dangerous individuals. Like, I think the algorithm just saw like Osama bin Laden, and it was like ban. So yeah, I'm currently on day 2 of my 7-day ban. It's a shitty time for it. I have a lot of things I need to be posting about right now.
Well, if I can rebroadcast anything, let me know.
Yeah, Mark, if you're watching this, I don't know if Zuckerberg is watching this or not, but if you're watching this, unban me. It's Mitchell Gomez. Like, do it.
So send me those links. I'll add them to the notes. I will see you at the burn. Thank you for being you in the world. And everyone, reach out to both of us. We'd love to stay connected and keep this fight going.
Yeah, dancesafe.org if you need to find me.
Thanks, Mitchell.
Yeah, thanks.